All right, so welcome everybody. I'm Erin Bartsch and I'm with the Blue Mountain Early Learning Hub. And Cassandra is here also with Child Care Resource and Referral. So is Toby, and we have Gabby also, who will be providing interpretation into Spanish. The first part, what we're going to do is we're just going to have some explanation about the COVID vaccine, how it works. I know there's a lot of question about it's safe, is it new technology, how is it different than other vaccines? So we'll have some of that information, and then after a little bit of that, we'll open it up if there's any questions. And then at the end, we'll talk about how you guys will be able to get access to the vaccine in the 3 counties across the hub. So if you guys have questions, you guys can put them in the chat box at any point in time, and then we'll go through those when we get to that time. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Ben Bartsch. He is a pulmonologist out of Spokane. As a pulmonologist, he has dealt with his fair share of respiratory infections such as COVID. So he brings to us a special set of knowledge of understanding respiratory illnesses and vaccines. So if you guys would help me welcome, in case you recognize the last name, it is my brother. So welcome my brother to this meeting. So Ben, if you could, or I guess I should call you Dr. Bartsch. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about how the mRNA virus or vaccine works.
All right, well, hello, thank you for having me here with you this evening. We'll make this as hopefully painless as possible, and then have a very brief description. I don't have a super long discussion really, and then we'll have some questions and answers. So first thing, let's briefly talk about what COVID is actually. So it goes by a bunch of different names, right? So you hear it as SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, coronavirus. So the virus itself is a coronavirus. It's a type of virus. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of that sphere with the little spike proteins sticking out of it. So that's what it is. So it stands for SARS-CoV-2 is probably the technical name that if you want to shorten it down. So severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus. So that's where SARS and then CoV, coronavirus, corona, V is for virus, 2 is the variant. So SARS originally, the first one was back in 2005, I believe. That was just referred to as SARS, and then there's one in the Middle East, and that was MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. And then this is SARS-CoV-2 because it's the second SARS virus. That's why it's the coronavirus variant 2, SARS-CoV-2. And then COVID-19 comes from coronavirus infection disease in 2019, COVID-19, or coronavirus for short. But coronavirus itself is a whole type of viruses. Most commonly, you know it as the common cold, right? So this particular variant of coronavirus is particularly problematic in the sense that it affects a certain group of people very, very bad. So the vast majority of coronavirus cases are either asymptomatic or mild. A lot of people who spread it don't even actually know they have it, and they'll just pass it on. That's what makes it difficult to contain. A small subgroup of people have, mild disease, kind of just like flu-like symptoms. And then a subset of people, they tend to be elderly or people who have other comorbid conditions. The biggest ones we really think that affect people are obesity and hypertension, diabetes. And if you have those 3 together, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, which they run together quite a lot actually, then you do very, very poorly actually. And then your age, of course, is kind of goes against you for most everything. So the older you get, unfortunately, is people may or may not realize your ability to bounce back from things doesn't really go as well as you'd like it to. So if you remember, and if some of you are in your 20s, I don't know, you can go out and do whatever you want and you're fine the next day. In your 40s, you're a little bit kind of sore the next day, and in your 60s, it might take you a while to recover. So that's a very brief discussion on the coronavirus itself. So what makes this particular virus unique is the spike proteins. So the coronavirus, if you've seen that picture, it's a ball with a little spike protein sticking out of it. Those spike proteins are unique to the coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, right? So each virus has its own particular protein set makeup that will make it unique to that virus. So every year you have to get a flu shot. That flu vaccine, just because the flu mutates quite frequently, the virus itself is pretty much standard, but the strains will mutate. So you have to get a flu shot every year. So specific to SARS-CoV-2 is the spike protein that's on SARS-CoV-2 is specific to that protein, or specific to that virus. So that's the target of the vaccine, actually. So if you can teach your body to attack the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2, then you can effectively make a vaccine for that. So that's what they did. So what's interesting about the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, the way that we've done a lot of vaccines in the past is you you find out what protein is unique to that virus, and then you make that protein, and then you make tons and tons and tons and tons of the protein, and then you inject that protein, and then your body goes and creates an immune response to that protein, and then you're immune to it. So that's how the flu vaccine works. So people are working on a protein-based vaccine similar to the flu shot for SARS-CoV-2. They have not finished that yet, so that'll be down the road probably. The specific virus or the specific vaccines that we have at this point are two types, or it's one type of vaccine by two manufacturers. So Moderna makes one and Pfizer, Genentech makes one. Those are both mRNA vaccines. So the first thing you have to know about mRNA vaccines, or this is something that they've been working on since the 80s, actually. This is not something that they just came up with overnight. They've been doing bench research on this thing since the 80s, and then they've been doing other trials in animals up until recently, and this is just the first time they've rolled this out into humans. So what is mRNA? mRNA is messenger RNA. So messenger mRNA, or mRNA for short, is the instructions to build proteins. So most all living cells will have the ability to generate and make proteins. So what these guys did, or gals, guys or gals, right? So what they did was they, in one weekend, actually, they invented the vaccine, which is amazing when you think about it. But once they sequenced the SARS-CoV-2 genome, and then they sequenced the spike protein that's unique to SARS-CoV-2, then they had it. They said, this is the protein that we need. This is the protein that we need to make antibodies to, and then we can be immune to this thing. So they did that in a weekend. And then over the next 11 months is when they actually have to roll out the human trials to make sure it's safe. So they take this mRNA and they attach it to a fat molecule, right? A very small little fat molecule, and then they inject it in your body. Your body takes it, pulls it into the muscle. Usually it's muscles. It gets transcribed into the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum is an organelle in a cell. So an organelle just is a structure in a cell that does something for you. There's a bunch of them. We won't belabor that point. But your endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short, generates a lot of proteins. And so it's absorbed into the ER, and then it starts pumping out this protein. And so your body then starts making the spike protein specific to SARS-CoV-2. And then it just gets dumped into your bloodstream, and it's not recognized as self, or it's recognized as foreign. So then your body mounts an immune response to that protein. And that is a twofold response. One fold will be to make antibodies, so IgG, IgM antibodies. And those antibodies are specific to that protein. you'll build that response, and then memory B cells, which makes antibodies, they will have that forever in your body, essentially. The other thing that will happen is your T cells will go ahead and also fight off this protein, and they will learn to recognize it as foreign, and then they'll just kind of sit in the background and wait until you get infected, and then attack it and fight the infection that way. So then what happens to this mRNA, right? So the mRNA then, after it sits in the endoplasmic reticulum for some period of time and starts telling the endoplasmic reticulum to start pumping out this protein, eventually the body recognizes that mRNA as foreign, and it doesn't like foreign things. And so it just breaks it down and it's gone. And so then that protein just goes away. It's gone. And that's how it works in a kind of a very quick nutshell. And so you get your first shot, which is the primer, basically. And then depending on which shot, if you get Moderna or Pfizer, you wait 14 to 21 days. You get a second shot. That second shot is the exact same thing, just telling your body this is a foreign protein. And so that's how that works. So with the first shot, probably 50 to 80% of people will be immune. And then that second shot is what confers about 95% immunity to the population. So after the second shot, 95% of people in the study did not contract the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And the ones that did contract it only had mild symptoms. So nobody in the trials had severe disease. So you're pretty much immune to it. And if you're in a small group of people, you may get the virus. You may have some sort of mild illness from it, but I don't think anybody really had a serious infection with it. That's what the data shows from the studies. So we'll talk briefly about human trials and how these vaccines get put out, or any medicine for that matter. So to bring any drug to market usually costs a drug company north of $1 billion, and it usually takes them a few years to do it. The reason why vaccines don't get pumped out as quick as, say, cholesterol medicines, erectile dysfunction medicines, headache medicines, any medicines that people take for some reason to help them, vaccines don't pay money, right? There's just not a lot of money in vaccines. It's just the nature of the beast. And so despite what anybody thinks, there's just not a lot of money in it. So the reason that this thing got pushed through so quickly is because it was a huge health risk to the world, and so you need a vaccine, and the government just pumped through Operation Warp Speed, just gobs and gobs. And we're talking billions of dollars into this thing to make it work and to get it done. So, like I said, the vaccine itself was actually made in a weekend, which is understand this too, 30 years in the making, and then in 1 weekend they actually make the vaccine. It's like these bands that are overnight success, even though they've been, putting out music at some level for usually a decade or more. They finally get their big break. They're an overnight success. It's the same thing with this vaccine. It takes researchers 20, 30 years to get this thing, and then in 1 weekend it all comes to fruition and they make the one vaccine. They actually had the vaccine available before the first person in the US died of coronavirus. So that's how fast they had the vaccine, but they had to run it through trials. So there's 3 phases to any sort of drug trial. Phase 1 is the safety phase. They just find a bunch of volunteers, inject them with the thing, make sure they don't fall over dead, grow a third arm, whatever. That's usually pretty quick. It's a short trial. Usually lasts a month or so. What they did to speed this trial up for these vaccines is they ran all 3 kind of at the same time. Usually you would do 1 trial, wait, get the data, second trial, wait, data, third trial. So the first phase is the safety trial. They did that. Simultaneously, they were starting the phase 2 trial, which is looking at side effect profiles and so on and so forth. And then the third trial is the big trial. In this case, I think Pfizer had 36,000 people. That's the efficacy trial to prove that it's effective. And through all those trials, nobody died, nobody grew through third arms or eyes or tails or whatever. And it had a 95% efficacy. So 95% of people were immune. The people that weren't had mild disease. So nobody had severe disease. So that's another good way to look at it. How do you decide whether or not people are immune? They basically just go out, they take all the people, they figure out if they've either had or not had coronavirus. And then they check for antibodies to make sure it's going to work. So, so say I inject, my sister Erin with the vaccine, and then I come back a couple weeks later, draw her blood, check for antibodies. She's got antibodies specific to SARS-CoV-2, and then over the following 6 months or whatever time frame we've decided, she doesn't get sick. So then we know it works. So that's very brief rundown of how it works. I can tell you personally, I've had both shots. So I got my first one in December, the first day it was available, December 17th. I happened to be in the hospital working that day, the day they rolled them out. And they rolled them out at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was stuck in the arm by like 9:30. I would say 95% of all the physicians that I know have either got the vaccine or eagerly waiting to get the vaccine. There's very few people that are kind of on the fence with it, and they're usually on the fence with it for reasons such as, I had the flu vaccine once, and I had an allergy to eggs, which is a contraindication to the flu vaccine, and I had a really bad reaction to that, anaphylaxis to that, or I have anaphylactic reactions to other things. These are the types of things that basically why physicians aren't getting the vaccine. But like I said, 95% of everybody I know is anxiously awaiting to get that vaccine, or they have already got it at this point. Had my second shot, tolerated it fine. My wife, she's a physician as well. She got her first shot 2-3 weeks ago. She got her second shot yesterday. My brother-in-law, he's a physician. He's got it. I could list hundreds and hundreds of people I know that have got the vaccine. The biggest concern that people really that I know that I've talked about that have with it, a certain grouping of people, when they get their second shot, they get kind of body aches, muscle aches, fevers, chills, kind of like you would for if you had the flu. It's not the flu, it's not SARS-CoV-2. It's basically your body's mounting an immune response. The good news is when that happens, you're immune. The bad news is you kind of feel pretty lousy for 24 hours. The other thing is to note that you, just like the flu shot, your flu vaccine, you can't actually get SARS-CoV-2, coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it, from the vaccine. It's not possible. It's not a thing. So it's scientifically impossible to actually catch it from that. Some people will always say, even it's the same with the flu shot. Oh yeah, I got my flu shot and then I got the flu. Well, if you got the flu shot and you got the flu, you probably contracted the flu while you were in line to get your flu shot, as opposed to from the shot itself. So that is the one thing I will say though about this, is there is a delay. So like if you got your flu shot today, from the time it takes you to get the shot to actually become immune, you could actually get coronavirus in that time frame. So the second you get the shot, you're not immune at that point. Like I said, about 50 to 80% of people probably are immune within 10 to 14 days, and then 95% immunity within, I think it's 10 to 14 days following the second shot. So anyway, that's all I kind of have as a brief talk. So I don't know, Aaron, did you want to comment or tell me what to do?
Okay, the one time he's ever said that to me. So thank
And
you.
last.
Thank you for that. Right now, we will open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions about the vaccine, I know we got quite a great overview right there. I know there's rumors floating around You know, Facebook is a great place for misinformation. And maybe you have other coworkers who you've heard who don't want the vaccine. So if you want, you guys can raise your hand and if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat box. So while you guys think of those and get ready, I do have one question for you, Ben. I know some people, they say, oh, they don't want to get the vaccine because there's a risk of side effects or whatever. Can you maybe talk about the difference between the risks of COVID versus the risks of the vaccine?
Yeah, so the risk of any vaccine essentially is always less than the risk of the disease that you're preventing. I can't think of a single vaccine that's out there for any disease that has a higher risk profile than the actual disease itself, right? I mean, that it's, people spend a lot of time and effort making vaccines to lower your risk of bad things happening. So if you look at if you look specifically at SARS-CoV-2, right? So the risk of serious illness, it's a huge spectrum, right? So kids essentially don't get really sick from it. I mean, you're talking about probably one in say maybe 10 to 100,000 will get pretty sick. One in even less than that will be in the hospital, and probably a rarity thing like one in a few 100,000 may actually die of SARS-CoV-2. But the reality is kids die of all sorts of viral illnesses, not SARS-CoV-2. So it probably is not much off of that, actually. As you get older, the disease gets worse and worse. So teenagers, their risk of bad outcomes, so morbidity or mortality is less than 1%. Same for 20s, 30s, 40s. You get up around 50ish, and then you're starting to get to maybe 0.5%. 60, you might be close to 3/4 to 1%, serious illness or death. You get into the 70s, you're talking around 10 to 20%. You get into your 80s and you're like at 50% mortality almost. So it's very much skewed. And then in each individual population of people, there's a subset, right? So healthy people, so the expression in medicine is well people do well, less well people tend to do less well. So if you're a young, active person with no health conditions, you're going to do better than somebody who's old, out of shape, overweight with diabetes and hypertension. That's just a sad reality of the world in which we live. So those are the kind of the gross kind of general numbers behind it. The only bad thing that you could probably happen, there's a handful of people that have had anaphylaxis to the shot, right? So, but even that, you're talking about, I think in the US, we're just under 1 million shots a day for the last month or so. So we've put I want to say 20 million shots in people's arms. And there's probably a handful of people, a couple hundred maybe, that have anaphylaxis from it. That's true with probably any medication. Someone's going to have a reaction, an anaphylactic reaction to something in the medicine, whether it's Tylenol, aspirin, SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, it doesn't matter. It's something in there that your body doesn't like. But I would take that, and clearly I took that risk, right, of less than 1% of 1% probably of a bad outcome than the disease. I mean, because you got to remember, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like either you live or die, right? That's the misnomer. It's like there's a huge group of people out there that just either feel bad for a couple of weeks. Like I have friends that are nurses and whatnot that are, in their 20s and 30s that are young and healthy and no comorbid problems. They don't die from the thing, but they're laying on their couch for 2.5, 3 weeks, right? Like I don't want that, right? That's not something I want to be a part of. So when you look at the thing, right, the side effect profile is probably less than 1% of something bad happening, but the disease itself is probably higher than that for if not mortality, definitely higher than that for morbidity, right?
Thank you. All right, so we have a question in the chat box. If a person already had the virus and gets the vaccine, what will it do to the body? And will there be symptoms?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So currently they're saying if you've had the disease itself within 90 days, hold off on getting the vaccine. That's twofold. One is, you know, if you're immune, whether it's through natural immunity or through a virus, you know, you probably aren't going to gain a lot from getting a vaccine. So yeah, that's the recommendation. So if it's within 90 days, you know, we're trying to give the vaccine to other people. If it's outside of 90 days, you'd be eligible for it. Your state and local government may be different. I don't know. You'd have either nothing would happen and you would have a sore arm, or you could have similar symptoms as you did previously if you had symptoms. Again, fevers, chills, body aches and pains, that kind of thing. So you'd feel bad for 24, 48 hours most. All my friends that have had reactions to the vaccine, for the second one, right? It's all been this transient thing that's lasted, you know, 12 to 24 hours, and they're usually better by 48.
All right, kind of along that line, another question. Somebody had gotten their first vaccine and then they ended up getting COVID before they got their second vaccine. Would there be any reason for them to get the second vaccine?
I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, I would, I don't know. That's not a question that gets asked a lot, right? Because it just isn't. It's unfortunate because either you had the virus just waiting dormant in your body because there's a lapse from the time you get infected to the time you show symptoms and you got the virus in there, or you picked it up between the time you got the vaccine to the time you start the immune process. That's a very specific question. I would probably defer that to the health department in your facility because they already have your vaccine sorted out, right? So, but because when they give you vaccines, they already know they're giving you one, they're giving you a second one. So I don't know. I would defer that and just say, hey, call your family physician or your local health department because they'll have an answer for that. But at some point, yeah, just get the second shot. I just don't know the timing of when you would want to do that.
Okay. There's another question. Can you get COVID twice?
So the easy answer is yes. The much more complicated answer is it's exceedingly rare. You know, probably in the US, when they looked at this, I think we've had 20 million cases now, I think. And there's a handful of people that have had it. So it's within the realm of possible, but it's exceedingly unlikely. The mutation in the virus is pretty small, actually. So you hear about these different strains and they're more contagious, they're more deadly, but these are on magnitudes of order fairly small, right? So if your infectivity is what they call the R0 value, it might change from like 1.5 to 1.6, which individually is not a big deal. On a population of hundreds of millions of people, it becomes much more problematic. So I don't think that the getting the virus a second time has really been an issue in as far as the cases I've heard and read about. People that have got it a second time, their symptoms are usually less severe than the first time. But it does happen. I mean, it's always within the realm of possible. You could get the same one, or you could get a slightly different one. But yeah, it's within the realm of possible, and I think that's why they're saying too, get the vaccine. That we think that's the best way to prevent you from getting it the first or the second time. But unfortunately, in the world, there's no guarantees.
All right, there's another question. Somebody heard somebody else say, why bother getting the vaccine if there's a new strain?
Yeah, so that would be like saying, I'm not going to get the flu shot this year because next year I could get a different strain of the flu. So, you know, again, this virus itself is actually pretty simple. It's pretty simple virus as far as viruses go. Coronaviruses themselves are simple viruses, right? The symptoms may not be simple, and the death rates are there what they are, but the virus itself, the structure of the thing is not overly complex. The thing that all SARS-CoV-2 has that is essentially the same as the spike protein on it. So if you can find the spike protein and you can fight that, then that's what makes the thing work. The strains themselves, when they're talking about, without going too far down a rabbit hole, right? So what happens is the virus attacks the ACE2, the angiotensin converting enzyme protein in your body. So, but what happens is it's kind of like a Y shape, right? So it's shaped like this, and the new variant might be shaped like this, or like this, or like this. So there are these slight variances in the thing, but the spike protein itself is still the same. So so that's one way to look at it. The other way is pragmatically saying, look, if the virus, if you made the vaccine to virus A, and it's 95%, and then it's 87% to virus B, and 86% to virus C, and 80% to virus D, and and then you keep having this thing, and you go down a few more letters. I mean, I would still take a 50% efficacy over nothing, right? I mean, that's that reality. I mean,
Makes sense. All right, it looks like that's all for the questions, unless anybody wants to unmute and ask a question real quick. I don't see anybody like moving quickly to unmute themselves.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah, go for it, Carrie.
And this is just more, I'm curious. I feel like I should have already known this, but when you were talking about immunity and percentages of protection, I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me before, but when we say 95% protection or the immunity, are we talking that 95% of individuals will be fully protected from COVID-19 and 5% will not be protected? Or are we saying that me, as a person who's gotten my COVID-19 vaccine and completed the 14 days post my second dose, has a 95% protection? It's more about a question of how immunity works. And again, I've done this, I work in the field, but yeah, the way you talked about it really made me like start to question my understanding of immunity.
Yeah. So basically, in a way, it's kind of binary, right? Either you're immune to something or you're not, right? Like that's kind of the way it works. So when you talk about people that are immune, 95% of people will have immunity to it. And so 5% of people don't. Now, the difficulty in that, right, is unfortunately, you could have immunity, you could have the antibodies to it, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be asymptomatic if you catch the virus, right? So the virus, there's this weird deal where, like, so you say you're hanging out with someone, they sneeze in your face, you get droplets in your eye, in your nose, you get the virus, it gets into your body and infects you. So there's this kind of lag time where that has to happen, and then your body has to fight it off to be immune. So you may still have symptoms, or but you're not. The thought is, right, like, so 95% of people didn't get sick, and then 5% of people that got sick, and that 5% of people that got sick, they didn't die and they had mild symptoms. It's difficult for anybody to tell anybody which grouping of people that they're in, and there's even the difficulty with, like, so if we draw your antibodies, just because you don't have antibodies doesn't mean that you weren't already infected and that you don't have immunity to it. It just means that we don't find antibodies in you. So and the thing with antibodies too, right, is they wane over time. So like if you get sick, you'll have a high antibody level now, and over time it's going to go down. But as soon as you get reintroduced to the virus, they're going to come back up. And that's the difference between different classes. You have IgG, IgM, IgA, and so all these different immunoglobulin antibodies that you have you know, they're in different tissues, they're at different levels. And so it's a very complex thing that people are trying to boil down to something. And the difficulty, right, is it's infuriating to basically the entire medical profession when, you know, like these people have spent decades coming up with this genius way of making you immune to something that's going to potentially kill you. And some knucklehead out there on the internet says, oh yeah, well, my third cousin, you know, who's a mechanic in his spare time, who has no formal training in anything, heard on the internet that this is a problem, and then you're going to grow a third eye from this thing, and then it just takes off like wildfire. You know, it's just frustrating, you know. And what's crazy is I heard this statistic the other day, again on the internet, of course, right? But they were saying that false information spreads 6 times faster through the internet than the actual information that's actual fact. So that's the problem that you're trying to compete against. It's unbelievable.
All right. And on that note, when we share this video on our Facebook page, you guys can share it on your Facebook page to help combat the false information. One last question is, what was the 2 different vaccines? I believe that's Moderna and Pfizer, correct? Those are the 2 vaccines.
Yeah, so basically it's just 2 companies that went the same route, right? So there's other companies out there that are coming up with other vaccine types. Merck stopped its vaccine study. They're just kind of late to the game. They said, yeah, we're out, we'll go do something else. Johnson & Johnson, they're making one. There's another company in England, I can't remember who it was, but they're actually not doing mRNA vaccines. They're doing different types of vaccines. So they're basically making a ton of protein that they're going to inject into your arm, and then that's how you're going to get the vaccine for it. But the only 2 that have been approved are Pfizer and Moderna. And on that note, one last thing. So people talk about how it was rushed through, and it wasn't rushed through. It was done quickly because of funding issues. But people will talk about this emergency use authorization, the EUA. It doesn't mean that it's more of a regulatory issue, right? So in order to get a drug through the entire FDA process takes years, and it's ridiculous. And there's differences between the European way to do it and the way the US does it. And the way the US does it is burdensome and it's cumbersome and it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. The way they get around it is the EUA. And so this emergency use, and it doesn't mean that it's not studied. It doesn't mean that it's not a good drug. It doesn't mean that it's not effective. It doesn't mean that it's got some sort of problems to it. It's just a way to get around all the regulatory red tape. And I'm probably speaking to a bunch of people that understand that regulatory red tape is sometimes problematic. So that's all it is. It has nothing to do with pushing a faulty vaccine or something cockamamie onto you. So.
All right, well, thank you, Ben, for all that information. And now we're going to change a little bit, and we're going to talk about how you guys can get access to the vaccine. So, Carrie, since you're on, yeah, you can go, Ben.
Question. Can I go? All right. Good night and good luck. Get vaccinated.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Bartsch.
You're welcome.
So, Carrie, if you want to share with everyone the process for getting access to the vaccine in Union County, that would be wonderful.
Of course, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for having me. Every time I hear somebody talk about the vaccine, I learn something, which I really appreciate. So in Union County right now, we are currently in the process of vaccinating people in phase 1A and then also phase 1B group 1. Of course, as we get additional vaccine, as those groups open, things will change. The best way for you to find out when you can get vaccine and what groups we're in is to visit our website, which is www.chdinc.org. We have a COVID-19 specific website, so /COVID-19 I think /COVID-19, and then there's one specific for vaccine. I'm sorry, we have quite a few different pages. So I think the best way is to just go to that main COVID-19 page, and then you can go from there. But the one thing I do think would be most useful and most beneficial is to sign up for our listserv. So we've just started a listserv. And if you go to chdinc.org/subscribe, enter your email address, what we'll do is every time we have an update, any time we open a category, anytime we provide a vaccine clinic, we will send out an email to that listserv and let folks know when they can sign up, when the appointments will be opened. And then, yeah, that's honestly going to be the most efficient way. And we do use our social media to put the word out as well. So any of those mechanisms, you will be able to get information about how to get vaccine in Union County.
Great, thank you. And I went ahead and put those links in the chat box. So if you guys, if you need to get access to those, you can click there. Unfortunately, the new director for the health department in Morrow County was unable to join. He had a last minute change in plans. He did share with me, and I'm going to put it in the chat box now, and then I'll go ahead and share my screen as well. So this is, if you are in Morrow County, this is the webpage you're going to want to go to. It's an online form where you can sign up. And you can see it down here. You'll put your information in, and you'll indicate what group you are in. And they are they're collecting this information, and then they will reach out to you when it is time to set up an appointment. And so that's how Morrow County is doing it. And then in Umatilla County, they have a website, and I will put this in the chat box as well. Their website has some information about when and where you can access the vaccine. In Pendleton, they've been doing some drive-through vaccine clinics. And for those vaccine clinics, there's no appointment. You just drive through. You'll stay in your vehicle. And after you get the clearance, they'll ask, which group you're in. And once you get through that and you get your vaccine, you'll have to park your car for 15 minutes while you wait for any side effects. So that's kind of the process for Umatilla County. That one, they are not scheduling appointments, and it's kind of, you just come, get in the drive-through lane, and wait your turn. And they said on their website, the link I put in the chat box is where they'll kind of keep up to date on who is next. I know today they had a drive-through clinic for school teachers, and I believe again tomorrow it's open again for school teachers. When I asked Alicia, she said childcare would be in February. Not sure much more than that. So are there any questions regarding access to the vaccine? All right, well, silence sounds like you guys have all the answers then. You guys have what you need. If not, you guys can always go to those websites. There's also a state website that I will go ahead and put in the chat box as well. And this website has information. So if you want to share information with your families, you can get access to information about the safety. They have some fact sheets that are in multiple languages. They have like a one-pager that describes who is in which phase. Granted, knowing that each county will, they have their own timetable for when they're giving the vaccines. They're getting vaccines at different rates. And so when your county opens up to the phase that you are in will vary. And each county is also varying in their process too, like we just mentioned, how some are having appointments and some are not. All right, so if there's no questions, I'm just going to check with Cassandra if she has everything she needs for people to get their 1 credit for Oro.
Yep, I've got everybody's name, and I'll get that entered online for everybody this evening.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Look forward for this